Douglas. You can go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, we're here today. We are glad that this day has happened, and we are launching a three days webinar on IFF, and we'll be able really to share experience. As you know, we all collaborate under the DA15 project, and we support countries from different continents and different contexts and experience. So this is a very good opportunity to meet together and share experience and learn from each other. Today's session is not, long, but it's really important because it sets the scene for the next 2 days. We have four key points on the agenda that you can see on the screen here. But before we move into this, I think we will have, do we go for a short introduction before we can have opening remarks from ECLAC? Just to know who is here and in which quality. I'll start by myself, just to take advantage of my role today. My name is Douglas Kigabo. I'm an economic affairs officer at UNECA, and I work particularly on this project on IFF since 2021. Happy to meet you all, and looking forward to very productive discussions. So I'll probably go to Geneva to hear from people representing UNCTAD and UNODC. I'm afraid some people don't follow us. Diana, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Douglas, but first we are going to give the word to Javier Mancero to open from our side. If you may us, just to give some words about this.
I thought the words would come. Yeah, I thought the words will come after introduction, but anyway.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah. I have the agenda. I'm following it up carefully. So I just want to know who is here before we can hear from the ECLAC on the opening remarks.
So I can start. So hello everyone. My name is Martin Kent. I'm with UNODC. I'm a statistician working on illicit financial flows for the crime side. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Martin. Diana, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. This is Diana Camedini from UNCTAD, representing UNCTAD on the measurement of tax and commercial illicit financial flows. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Diana. Do we have anyone from ESCA?
Good afternoon, good morning.
Alik, are you there?
Yes, Alik Nyasulu, ESCAP Statistics Division, and doing this work in Asia Pacific region, Bangkok, West Bangkok. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alik. Then do we have some people from pilot countries participating before we go to ECLAC and the focus countries? I see Andrew Onyeka, the national consultant from Nigeria, has sent a message that he's online following. Any other from African country? I can't see anyone. Anyone from your side, Alik?
No, nobody from the side.
Very good. So I'll hand over to ECLAC to introduce the team. And after that, we'll go straight to the opening remarks by Xavier Machero. Over to you, Alfonso. You are muted.
Yeah, my name is Alfonso Cerón. I am from ECLAC, and we are working with Mexico in this session, and we are happy to join this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, who else from your team?
Beatriz, Mónica, Paula.
Hello, good morning. My name is Mónica Aguayo. I'm a consultant of the Statistics Division of ECLAC, and happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you very much, Mónica.
Hello,
Hi,
I'm Paula
everyone.
Fuensalida. I'm from the Statistics Division of ECLAC. And I'm here to help this webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
And my name is Beatriz Ubieta. I'm part of the ECLAC team in the Statistics Division as well, and happy to be in the webinar as well.
Thank you very much. You're most welcome. I'm told we have the focal point from Nigeria, Mr. Idris. If you can hear us, please open the mic and introduce yourself. He is our focal point in Nigeria. Idris, can you hear us? Okay, I understand there might be some difficulties, Mike, but yeah, so he's sending a message that he can't mute himself. He can't unmute himself.
Good day. My name is Idris Mohammed Abdullahi, the focal person from Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Idris, for joining us today. We appreciate. So, if there is anyone else, we might now go to the opening remarks. We want to hear from Mr. Xavier Manchero. I hope I pronounced the name. And please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing the name rightly. He's the Chief of Social Statistics Unit, Statistic Division at ECLAC. Over to you, Manchero.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Well, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. On behalf of Rolando Campo, the Director of the Statistics Division of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, it is a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you to this international webinar on measuring illicit financial flows, which is organized jointly with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and the UN Regional Commissions, the Economic Commission for Africa, the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, and the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. This meeting is part of the Global Development Account Project, the A15, Measuring and Curbing Illicit Financial Flows, which aims to strengthen countries' statistical capacities to measure illicit financial flows, promote the exchange of experiences, and build an empirical base to inform more effective and transparent public policies. Over the next 3 days, we will discuss the methodologies and national experiences in measuring illicit financial flows linked to organized crime, such as drug trafficking, trafficking in persons, and smuggling, as well as those related to taxes and international commerce, including tax evasion, avoidance, and commerce misinvoicing. All of this work is carried out within the framework of the SDG indicator 1641, which measures the total value of inward and outward illicit financial flows. ECLAC's contribution, in close collaboration with UNCTAD, goes beyond the production of statistical estimates. It seeks to provide evidence-based inputs for public policies that help reduce these flows and enhance financial integrity and strengthen countries' fiscal space. We wish to express our sincere appreciation to all the countries, institutions, and colleagues supporting this joint effort. We are confident that the discussions and the conclusions emerging from this meeting will help deepen interregional cooperation and advance the development of comparable and high-quality statistics on illicit financial flows. With these words, and again on behalf of ECLAC, it is my great honor to officially declare the international webinar on measuring illicit financial flows open. Thank you very much.
Even if we are online, we can give him a round of applause and for the great opening remarks and setting the scene for the next 3 days. I think we are now clear about the next step. I will probably now allow us to go through the agenda of the day. I don't know if Alfonso, Tim, you needed to say something before we can go into general context and global project advances?
No. Go ahead.
Brilliant. So we have basically a few sessions today before we conclude with question and answers. I think for the logistic and protocol side of things, we will probably hear from different presenters at different session, and then reserve questions and answer at the end of the sessions. That will be more efficient for us. So please note your question or comments that you want to make and reserve it for the last session of the day. So as you all see on the agenda, we'll now move on overview of the project's objectives, progress, and the role of crime and tax and commercial IFF measurement. Presentation by Diana and UNCTAD from UNCTAD. Diana and Martin. Diana from UNCTAD, Martin from UNODC. Over to you, colleagues.
Thank you, Douglas. I think Martin is. Would you mind sharing the presentation? Yeah. I think Martin will start, if we can hear them. Martin, are you speaking?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that. Yes. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone here. Like I said, my name is Martin Kins, and I'm with UNODC, and together with my colleague Diana from UNCTAD, we'll be talking you through the conceptual framework for the statistical measurement of illicit financial flows. It's giving you sort of a bird's eye view of the project and what we're trying to accomplish here. So on the next slide, I'll give a brief outline of the current presentation. If we could go to that would be great. Thank you. So we'll briefly talk about why IFFs are important and their inclusion in the 2030 agenda, some of the key milestones that have been accomplished to date, and then we'll dive into some of the definitions as provided for in the conceptual framework that was developed by UNODC and UNCTAD. And then we'll briefly talk about some of the testing that's been going on.
Sorry, Martin. Sorry,
yes.
but we have some problems to hear you. Can you check your mic, please?
Yeah. Is this any better or?
It's better. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so like I said, finally, we'll talk a little bit about the testing of methods that has taken place so far and some of the guidance that has been developed by both UNCTAD and Development and UNODC. So, yeah, next slide, please. So, illicit financial flows are explicitly a part of the 2030 agenda. So they are included under Goal 16, which focuses on peace, justice, and strong institutions. And they are specifically included under Target 16.4, which, as you can see on the screen, focuses on significantly reducing IFFs, or illicit financial flows, and also arms flows. The indicator that is associated with this is 1641. So this is where we actually ask member states to provide data and measure the phenomenon, where we look at the total value of both inward and outward illicit financial flows in current US dollars. So the two co-custodian agencies, UNCTAD and Development and UNODC, are mandated to identify the agreed statistical methodologies for measuring this phenomenon and also collecting the data at the global level. And in the next slide, we'll talk through some of the key milestones that have been accomplished to date. So as you can see, this process really started in 2017, where from 2017 to 2018, UNODC and UNCTAD held some expert consultations to take stock of the current research knowledge and some of the experiences regarding different types of IFFs around the world. These expert consultations included national statistical offices, financial intelligence units, tax authorities, academia, etc. And based on this, and to advance the lack of statistical consistency in concepts, a statistical task force was established on the measurement of IFFs in January of 2019. And as you can see, we had member states in there, but also the OECD and IMF, etc. And the task force reviewed previous research and developed the first understanding of IFFs, and this then resulted in the release of the conceptual framework for the statistical measurement of illicit financial flows in October of 2020. You can use the QR code on the slide to have a look at that publication. This document, for the first time, really provides definitions and approaches for measuring IFFs, and we'll talk about some of the main things from this document during this presentation. And this document was also, the concepts within it and the methods within it were endorsed at the 53rd UN Statistical Commission in March of 2022. And then, of course, at the same time, in parallel to this process, we've done some pilot testing in several countries around the world. And in March of 2023, the first data was actually reported on the SDG indicator database from 9 countries, namely Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Colombia, Ecuador, the Maldives, Mexico, Myanmar, Nepal, and Peru, on different kinds of IFFs. And we're continuing this work to try to increase the number of countries that are reporting this. And now I'll hand over to my colleague Diana for some more in-depth definitional work.
Thank you, Martin. So according to the conceptual framework for the statistical measurement of IFFs, illicit financial flows are defined for statistical purposes as financial flows that are illicit in origin, transfer, or use, that reflects an exchange of value and that cross country borders. There are a few core elements of this definition that are very important to flag, also that they represent a development, a significant development from the previous definitions or previous classifications of illicit financial flows we have seen before. The first one is that we are talking about illicit flows. So not only illegal activities are activities that can be behind illicit financial flows, but illicit flows means that the classification, the definition also includes flows from practices that are not strictly illegal, but they're highly detrimental to sustainable development, such as aggressive tax avoidance. We will see, if you scroll the slides further, we'll see also classification. The second element is that we are talking about cross-border flows, not domestic flows. which is something that differentiates a little bit with the definition of money laundering. For illicit financial flows, we need to have the flows to cross the border, meaning crossing the border, adopting the crossing the border, the definition of exchange between a resident and non-resident actor. The third element, please, we are talking about flows and not stock or net flows, meaning that the flows need to be measuring inward and outward IFFs and cannot measure just the weight, the wealth held abroad, but need to measure each flow back and forth. Also, the flows cannot be net out, but the objective is to detect really each flow in each direction. Finally, another core element of this definition, which is a bit of the advancement compared to the past, is that we are not limiting ourselves to the definition of illicit financial flows as exchange of financial assets, but rather we are including any transaction that involves any type of assets, including cash, precious material, metals, cars, whatever you may think you can cross the border. If you progress again, we'll see the classification, which was also proposed under the conceptual framework. So as I said, it comprises also illegal activities that are considered as illicit because detrimental for sustainable development. And it includes illegal activities. So the classification basically classifies IFFs based on their activities at their origin into 4 types. The first is illicit tax and commercial practices, where aggressive tax avoidance is distinguished between, which is purely legal, with illegal tax and commercial practices, as it could be trade misinvoicing or tax evasion. In addition, there are illegal activities that are classified in 3 types. Illegal market activities comprising of drug trafficking, wildlife trafficking, firearms trafficking, smuggling of migrants, and many other illegal market activities. Corruption, which has been taken a separate category of criminal activities because it's a cross-cutting issue that facilitates also the transfer of IFF abroad. And finally, the exploitation type and terrorist financing activities include both exploitation and theft type activities, such as trafficking persons, including sexual exploitation of forced labor, theft, extortion, racketeering, fraud, and the terrorist financing also includes another category, which is the financing of crime in general. So this is the last one, is particularly relevant when we think about the illicit being illicit in transfer or use. So the funds can be illicit, but in their use can be illicit, such as in terrorist financing. Another classification that we have identified in the conceptual framework is the distinction between the income generation illicit financial flows and the income management illicit financial flows. The income generation illicit financial flows is when the stage when the illicit financial flows are generated. So it's all the set of cross-border transactions that are either performed in the context of the production of illicit goods and services or generate illicit income for an actor during a non-productive illicit activity. For example, when we think about the drug market, such illicit financial flows are the ones that are used to, for example, pay for drugs across the border or precursor across the border. And so they are strictly linked to illegal markets and their functioning. And they are also transnational supply, reflect the transnational supply demand of illicit goods and services. While income management illicit financial flows refer most to the idea of the money laundering activities. So proceeds of crime are being generated. These need to be moved abroad for further laundering. These are the so-called income management illicit financial flows. Technically speaking, we call it as a set of cross-border transactions that are that use illicit income to invest in financial or non-financial assets or to consume goods and services. So it's literally the income that is, once the illegal activities accumulate proceeds, then these will need to be transferred abroad to be hidden further. These are the so-called income management IFFs. So the separate accounting of income generation and income management can help reduce the risk of double counting and allow the consistency also with the system of national accounts, balance of payment, and other statistical or accounting frameworks. Next slide, please. there are certain features or advantages that the conceptual framework proposes. First of all, the conceptual framework really invites countries to measure illicit financial flows using a disaggregated approach. So generating separate estimates for each IFFs type, considering and taking taking into account that each predicate activity needs their own data, and there will be needed different type of approaches and data to measure those type of activities that are generating illicit financial flows. So in this sense, it invites to adopt the bottom-up approach. So starting from the value estimation of the value generated by illicit activities to derive the amount of proceeds available for domestic cross-border laundering, such as IFFs. It's a comprehensive framework that aims to include all types of activities that are at the origin of IFFs, and as the advantage that is applicable at the country level. So the approach also to facilitate the SDG reporting allows to really measure IFFs at the level of countries with country data using a similar methodology for each country to allow for comparability. Is also something that has been mentioned before, that this framework is compatible and tries to be aligned to establish concepts and standards from economics and accounting, such as the system of national accounts and balance of payment. Next slide, please. You may have heard about the concept of illicit financial flows and non-observed economy. We thought this will be relevant for this discussion because it's something we haven't discussed so far very much. But we have tried to shape or identify where IFF cross the concepts of shadow economy, underground economy, underground activities, to make sure that it's clear how to locate illicit financial flows also for accounting and the reporting into official statistics as well. We have adopted or classified IFFs, identified IFFs as a group of activities that can be framed using the Eurostat tabular approach to non-exhaustiveness. This is a quite old approach, but it still applies. Basically, illicit financial flow pertain to activities of producers deliberately not registering, so carrying out unlicensed legal activities, or producer deliberately not registering, so carrying out illegal activities that are not allowed to be carried out in countries. And finally, also activities of producer deliberately misreporting, such as producer that legally produce items or commodities, but they do not, for example, pay taxes. So they misreport their income. This, I think, will help a little bit understanding how this crosses also with the concepts of informal sector and shadow economy. Next slide, please. Finally, this slide will be shared also with the contribution from Martijn. The methods, as already mentioned by Martijn, has been pilot tested in several countries. 9 already reported statistics, but in general, so far the method has concluded testing in 22 countries, and currently under this project and other projects, further methodological refinement is being carried out in 12 countries. You can see from the map which country are there. We are producing, for the purpose of this project, something that will come up next year, comprehensive IFF statistical framework, which is expected for now 2026, which will provide guidance on how to aggregate estimates on tax and commercial and crime-related IFFs. So this particular publication will help, which is an outcome of this project as well, will help countries to have everything in one document, so the conceptual framework, all the methodologies into as annex of this document, and then also this document will explore opportunities to measure illicit financial flow in satellite and thematic accounts. This also goes back to the concept of alignment together with the terminology and concepts of accounting frameworks. I'll leave the floor to you, Martijn, for the last bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. So as you can see in the final bullet point on the slide, from the previous slide, there is also forthcoming guidance from UNODC on measuring crime-related IFFs, because before we can compress everything into the statistical framework, we want to still publish a comprehensive report that really captures everything from the crime side. And this is also what the next presentation will be about, so I won't go into too much details here, but that should be published early next year and will feed into the statistical framework that Diana mentioned. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
very much. Thank you very much, Diana, Martin, for your very insightful presentation. And I think in the interest of time, I will change a little bit the dynamic. I would suggest that we move to the next presentation, especially on Martin's presentation on methodologies for measuring crime-related IFFs. And it will be followed by this presentation by Martin again on the drug flow, illicit incomes, and IFF studies. After that presentation, we will probably take a couple of questions before people forget their observation and question. And after discussing questions and comment, we will then move to country experience in crime-related IFF. I think that will be more smooth way of moving through sessions. So if this is agreeable, over to you, Martin, on the methodologies for measuring crime-related IFFs.
I'm trying to share my screen. Let me know if it works.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Fantastic. All right, so as mentioned, I'll be briefly talking about some of the methodologies that were developed for measuring crime-related IFFs and the methodological approaches that are recommended. Like I said, this has not yet been collated into a single publication yet by UNODC. It's kind of spread all over our website at the moment, but we're trying to now put this all together into a single document to really help member states take the next step for crime-related IFFs and be able to measure some of these themselves going forward. There we go. So just as a quick overview, so this really builds on the conceptual framework that we just talked about that was developed by UNCTAD and UNODC back in 2020. And it extends this and presents specific methods for specific crimes even. So you may recall that Diana presented these 4 types of IFFs that were related to tax and commercial activities, illegal markets, corruption, and exploitation type and terrorism related activities. But even within these, for example, within illegal markets, there are, of course, different illegal markets, and different illegal markets require different measurement approaches. So this document tries to specify that and give some guidance on how best to proceed. The focus of this presentation is, of course, on crime-related IFFs, and tomorrow there will be more detail on tax and commercial from my colleagues at UNCTAD. The aim is also to allow member states to quantify these IFFs and then also better understand what kinds of IFFs are affecting a country and develop more effective strategies to combat these crime-related IFFs and also combat misuse of the financial system by organized criminal groups in particular. So as indicated, we use a bottom-up measurement approach. Just quickly, why not top-down? Well, with top-down, you attempt to measure IFFs, for example, by interpreting or modeling inconsistencies in different types of aggregated data, for example, the capital account of the balance of payment. But this really doesn't give enough detail. So we recommend the bottom-up approach to really attempt to measure IFFs by analyzing the functioning of the relevant illicit activity. This really ensures that the measurement approach is tailored to specific crimes and contexts, and really gives you precise, granular insights that are necessary if you want to be able to formulate effective policy. So the basis of this is that we reconstruct flows, whether flows of physical goods or services, and convert these flows into monetary values. And then as a final step, identify the cross-border component of this to isolate what part of these flows that we've constructed is actually an illicit financial flow. Because as said, we need some sort of cross-border transfer from a resident to a non-resident for it to count as a illicit financial flow. So these stages and estimation principles for crime-related IFFs. So we basically have two stages, as also just explained. We have both income generation and income management. So the guidelines will also focus on these two things, where for income generation, we focus on these specific criminal activities. In the guidelines specifically, we'll focus on 4. I'll talk about that in one of the next slides. And there's a separate element for income management, where you also use slightly different methods to derive IFFs from income management. Then there are, of course, inward and outward flows, so money coming into your country or leaving your country, depending on the residency of the parties involved. And of course, if you can better understand both income generation and income management and the inward and outward flows, you can better understand your position, the position of your country in terms of the illicit financial flows that are generated by specific crime. So the basic estimation principles for a single country, so this is important, we're really looking at the single country perspective with a minimum of data, relies on a very simple supply-demand model represented by the equation on the screen here. So here P is the production, for example, the production domestically of a specific drug, for example, plus the imports of that specific drug should be equal to the consumption of that drug, the exports, the change in stocks, and also the losses. In the case of drug markets, this would be seizures, for example. So once you derive all of these quantities, you can try to convert this into monetary values by simply multiplying the observed quantities with market prices. Although, of course, this is much harder in practice than it is in theory, because deriving accurate quantities and accurate market prices can be quite challenging already. This gives us an idea of the illicit gross income that is generated by criminals. But of course, this doesn't represent the profits that they make. If we want to get to that, we have to deduct the intermediate expenditures. So, for example, if I am a country and I'm a drug trafficker in a specific country, and I sell drugs to the residents of that country, maybe I need to import precursors to actually produce these drugs. And this is, of course, a cost. So these costs need to be deducted to get illicit net income, which is important for IFFs related to income management. And then finally, as part of the estimation principles, we need to apply some sort of resonancy filter. So we need to see which of the flows we've just established actually qualify as illicit financial flows. So, like I said, we have activity-specific modules in this upcoming guidance where we focus on 4 markets. Of course, there are many more markets, but this provides a good basic overview for markets that are often analyzed from the crime side. We have a chapter dedicated to drug trafficking, where you need specific data on seizures, on purity dust prices, and also domestic consumption to really be able to estimate illicit financial flows related to drug trafficking. Then we have smuggling of migrants, where the main analysis relies on determining how many smuggled journeys have been conducted and how much money has been paid to facilitate those. Then we have trafficking in persons, which is more on the exploitation side of the model that we showed in the beginning, where we look at, okay, what is the exploitation revenue per victim over a certain time period, for example, per year? How much is each victim generating from the exploiter on a yearly basis? And then finally, we cover wildlife trafficking, which is very, very similar to drug trafficking. And you just apply, instead of looking at, for example, cocaine or heroin, you look at products like ivory or rhino horn or rosewood. So these different modules ensure that the measurement is accurate and relevant to the specific criminal activity being investigated, and provides really detailed insights that can inform targeted policy responses. Briefly on the income management stage, after illicit income has been generated and the intermediate expenses have been deducted, you have sort of the profits generated by the illegal activity. And this profit can again be used by the criminal organization or the individuals involved in this in a way that generates IFFs. For example, if I invest part of my illicit proceeds to buy property in another country. That's one way of using this in the income management stage. So we also want to be able to estimate this, and the document provides some basic guidance on this, where we utilize parameters. In this case, we call them alpha and beta. It's not the most interesting names, but these are the names that we use for the share of net income that is sent abroad, or the share of illicit funds entering from abroad, respectively. So some of the potential data sources that can be used to derive IFFs in the income management state include suspicious transaction reports, FIU data, so financial intelligence unit data, or seizure data, and also mirror statistics. As a very brief example, just to show income generation and income management, this is for IFFs emerging from drug trafficking. So consider a country X that is a drug importing country for local consumption, let's say for cocaine, for example. So as you can see on the left side, the country imports a certain amount of drugs. Of course, they have to pay for this, so that leads to an outward IFF related to the income generation stage, because this is related to the specific drug trafficking activity. Then these drugs are sold at the retail level to domestic customers, and some sort of income is generated based on that. So the drug traffickers make money from that, and then they can, in the income management phase, they can use those proceeds, those profits, to invest or buy things abroad, which would then again generate an outward IFF, only this time related to the income management stage. Some further guidance that is included is on quality assurance. So how do you actually do this and ensure that you have the most reliable estimates, which is very difficult because, again, data sources can be sparse, of low quality, and you also require data from many different sources, so it can be quite difficult to compute these estimates. So we try to include some quality assurance measures to get the most reliable estimate possible, considering the data limitations. So we, for example, we include an institutional mapping to really try to figure out which source of data can be found at which institution, and how do we rate these different sources of data using quality criteria such as the accuracy, the timeliness, etc. We also include recommendation to include scenario modeling, so to really create a low, medium, and high estimate to show possible outcome ranges and really reflect the uncertainty that is inherent in the data sources, the underlying data sources. And finally, we also recommend to do some external triangulation and really compare the estimates with other microeconomic data like GDP or export, for example, to validate results and ensure that the IFF estimates you are getting are not several orders of magnitude larger than GDP of a country, for example. And implementing these quality assurance measures really ensures that the methodology is as robust as possible and is also suitable for informing policy decision. Very briefly, a conclusion and on possible future directions. So the conclusion, the document will provide modular and scalable methods that are adaptable and scalable across various crime types and contexts. So you can extend it beyond the 4 types that I just mentioned here. And they provide a strong foundation for policymaking and also facilitate international reporting, of course, SDG 1641. And one of the key things that is very vital for generating these statistics or these estimates is cooperation and data quality enhancement. Particularly, like I said, the data that is required is typically with different custodian agencies, and getting these custodian agencies to share the relevant data and break data silos can be quite challenging. So data sharing agreements at the national level are often required to be able to make these estimates. And finally, for possible future directions, so we would like to expand this. It's a general framework, so we can expand it to include other crime types, for example, such as cybercrime or illegal mining. But we would also like to develop methods to tackle other parts of the framework, because now we mostly cover illegal markets and some exploitation type activities, but we haven't really touched upon the corruption part and the terrorist financing activities part, so that should be further developed. And what other avenue that we can potentially explore in the future to get more reliable estimates is to explore the possibility of creating probabilistic estimations using simulations and then generating confidence intervals. However, this would have to rely on much improved and higher quality data in order to make sure that we can provide reliable estimates. So, and again, in all of this continued collaboration between national agencies and international agencies is really required to get the best possible outcomes. All right, that's it from my part on this upcoming guidance. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Martin. I think your presentation has raised a couple of questions that I can't not let I can't avoid being discussed now before we move on to the next presentation. I've seen a couple of questions posted online. Can I ask Beatrice to read those questions?
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. There are two questions in the chat so far. The first one is for Diana and Martin, and the second one is from this presentation. I will start with for the second one, and is from Sonia Herrera from INEC, and it says, what are the main sources analyzed within the methodology to assurance the quality of the parameters of the estimation for the illicit financial flows?
I'm not entirely sure I fully understand the question, but for IFFs related to crime, there are typically multiple potential data sources that can be used within a country. Those data can be held by different agencies. As part of the process, we recommend to really try to map the institutions that hold relevant data. And for example, if you want pricing data on drugs, for example, this may be held by multiple institutions, and the data may not even always agree with each other. So yes, this is very challenging, and it is recommended to map these different data sources and then go through a systematic review of each of these data sources and really analyze, okay, how accurate do we believe these data to be? Do they accurately capture the phenomenon under investigation, etc.? And then based on that, try to make some sort of hierarchy based on those quality criteria and say, okay, we believe for pricing data on, for example, cocaine, this data source is the most reliable. Those are the ones that we will use. But then again, still reflecting the uncertainty in the final estimates by taking a range, like I said, so do scenario estimates. So take a low, a medium, and a high price. Or for example, for the prevalence of drugs, if you find that the prevalence of use in the country is 1%, you may want to include a lower and an upper limit as well to feed into your model and produce estimates, in a certain range. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Next question, Beatrice.
The next question is referring to Diana and Martin's presentation on the general context, and it says, as we saw in the previous presentation, there are economic activities where it's not possible to directly determine whether the money is part of an illicit financial flow. Is there a hierarchy of priority at the time of analysis that allows us to establish whether a money flow is potentially illegal? If so, what are the criteria for establishing that hierarchy?
Martin, you want to take this? Shall I take it? Or
I think it's more relevant for your part of the estimation. So
yeah,
please.
it's a very interesting question because it also pertains to the type of approach we are giving to the estimates. I think from the tax and commercial side, it will become more visible tomorrow when we speak about the data we use and how these are being used to detect IFFs. So, for example, in the tax and commercial illicit financial flows, we measure trade misinvoicing, which means the false declaration on a customs procedure, so on a trade, international trade, to either evade duties or also even committing aggressive tax avoidance. Anyway, this part, it's important to understand that the methodology here detects which are the transactions that are most at risk of IFFs. And we are also developing further a system to verify this, how this transaction could be also reflecting into money flows in, for example, in the commercial bank system. Other approaches are rather more economic estimates about what could be an activity could be generating based on a series of factors. I think Martin already mentioned that there is a supply-demand model for the crime, and there maybe there is no look directly onto specific monetary flows, but rather we look at the market and then derive how much flows it could be generated. I hope this reflected or somehow answered your question, but I think it will become more clear in the next later in the next day how the data are being used to detect the flows.
Thank you very much, Diana. Yeah, I think just to emphasize your last point, since this is the first day, we are going through basically introduction of concept and approaches, but I think as we move along through the next 2 days with some practical examples, people will be able to understand to have some clarity on questions they might have today. If you allow me, then I'll ask Martin to take us through the next presentation on drug flows, illicit incomes, and IFF study. Over to you, Martin.
Great, thank you. So you're stuck with me for one more presentation. So I hope that you can see the screen again. Yes, so speaking of being a little bit less theoretical and a little bit more practical, now I would like to give a brief example of a study that UNODC published earlier this year that focuses on the trafficking of opiates and methamphetamine on the so-called Balkan route. Here we looked at we reconstructed physical flows, just like I mentioned in the previous presentation, determined which illicit incomes were generated based on that, and then how much illicit financial flows that actually generates. The big difference with the methodology that I just mentioned is that the methodology used in this study is more complex because like I said, it evaluates an entire route. So it looks at multiple countries at the same time, which is a little bit more complicated and of course has higher data requirements. Yes. So firstly, what is the Balkan route? I assume many people will be familiar with it, but maybe not everyone. So this is a traditional route that has been used for many, many years, mainly for the trafficking of opiates, specifically heroin, from Afghanistan through the Islamic Republic of Iran and Turkey into different parts of Europe. So, like I said, this is a new study that we did as a follow-up to a 2015 study. But the 2015 study only looked at the trafficking of heroin on this route, and in this new study, we looked both at heroin and methamphetamine. Yes. So the study uses information from multiple countries, like I mentioned, and most of the information that was used was actually collected by UNODC through its two data collection instruments on drugs. One is the ARQ, which is the annual report questionnaire, where we collect aggregate data from member states, for example, on the total amount of drugs seized in a specific year, or prices, or the demand for a specific drug by looking at the prevalence of use in a specific country. We also used IDS data, which is our data collection on individual drug seizures, to better understand the trafficking networks that are involved here. So yeah, I think we can skip this. We now all know what illicit financial flows are, that there are both inward and outward IFFs. And I just want to emphasize again that we look at different income estimates. So we look at the illicit gross income, which is the total, basically the revenue that traffickers make. We look at the intermediate expenditure, which is basically the costs that traffickers have to generate that illicit income. And then finally, the illicit net income, which is basically just the illicit gross income minus the intermediate expenditure. So very briefly, like I said, the methodology is a little bit more complicated because we're looking at an entire network. So it is a 6-step methodology that we applied here. The details of this are in the publication, and also in even more detail in the 2015 publication. But essentially, we identified different trafficking flows that we see. So we have a group of countries, and we try to see, okay, which links do we see? Which countries are basically trading with each other? Then we try to identify the relative weights. So, for example, for country A, how much of drug X is it getting from country B and country C? How is that distributed? Then we estimate the internal demand for a given country. So, for example, country A needs to get 50 kilograms to meet its internal demand. And based on that, we can estimate the imports and the quantities exchanged between countries. Now, this is also, particularly for opiates, this is a little bit easier because for opiates, essentially on the Balkan route, there is only one supplier, or there used to only be one supplier, which was, of course, Afghanistan. But ever since the change in government, the de facto government, and the ban on the cultivation of poppy, this has changed dramatically. But the study only looks at the time frame from 2019 to 2022, so it doesn't take into account this ban on growing of opium in Afghanistan just yet. But yeah, essentially there's one supplier for this country, and all other countries have to import these drugs. Whereas if we look at methamphetamine, this is more complicated because methamphetamine is a synthetic drug, and that can actually be produced essentially anywhere as long as you have a laboratory. So then production is very decentralized. In any case, once you determine the quantities exchanged between the different nodes of the network that we've constructed, we can then estimate the monetary values that are associated with that. So we know that, for example, if 20 kilograms of drugs goes from country A to B, then we know that a flow of money must go in the opposite direction to pay for these drugs. Briefly, these are two relatively complicated looking graphs. But this is the estimated drug flows after the reconstruction of the network. The one on the left really shows the first part of the Balkan route. So we look at the flow from Afghanistan into the Islamic Republic of Iran and Turkey, and how that then flows into Europe. And the chord chart on the right shows how this then is distributed within Europe, looking only at the opiates that come in through the Balkan route. So here we can see that trafficking is concentrated in key hubs, and I'll focus my explanation on the chart on the right. You can see that every country has its own bubble. Basically, the bigger the bubble, the more drugs flow out of that country. And then with the arrows, you can identify to which other countries those flows are actually going, with the width of the arrow indicating how much drugs is flowing in that particular route. So, for example, you can see, well, if you look very closely, you can see that from Belgium, which is in the middle on the right, basically, you can see outflows going to the United Kingdom, but also, for example, to the Netherlands. And then from the Netherlands to other countries again, to Germany particularly. So this is what the network basically looks like for opiates. And this allows us to look at the network and estimate the quantities, because that's what you see here. And we did this both for opiates and also for methamphetamine. And one of the key differences with opiates for methamphetamine, you can see again in the chart on the right, you can see that there are far fewer arrows, which is again related to the fact that methamphetamine doesn't necessarily need to be traded as much, because you can actually produce it domestically quite easily, because you just need a laboratory for it. You don't need to grow a crop, for example, that requires specific growing conditions. So, but again, with methamphetamine, we also see that trafficking is concentrated in key hubs. So if you look at the chord chart on the right again, you can see a couple of really big bubbles. Those are the core nodes of the network. And for methamphetamine, these are countries like Germany, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Bulgaria. So based on this, we also estimated interception rates. The key message being here that interception rates, so how much of the drug that is passing through a country is actually seized by authorities, is usually highest in proximity to production sources. So you can see that Afghanistan and Iran are both very dark. This is because the seizure rate in these countries is close to 30%. So they are actually, the national authorities are putting in a lot of effort and are seizing a lot of the product that is moving through their countries. but this is partially also related to the fact that the closer you get to the source, the larger the shipments will be. And of course, the closer you get to retail level, the smaller the individual shipments will be, and the harder it will be to intercept significant amounts of drugs. Based on this, we managed to estimate the gross income that is associated with drug trafficking of these two kinds of drugs. And we put this on a chart here. You can see that that's really most of the income is earned in a couple of key hubs. So for opiates, you can see particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran, but also the United Kingdom, Italy, and Germany. And for methamphetamine, one of the key players is Germany, but also the United Kingdom, Italy, and the Netherlands really pop out as markets that generate a large amount of illicit gross income associated with the trafficking of these drugs. Here we basically plotted the illicit gross income as a share of GDP. I'll skip this for this particular presentation. So in terms of the illicit income generation, one of the findings from this analysis is that between 2019 and 2022, the annual illicit gross income associated with the trafficking of these two types of drugs amounted to about 14 to 21.5 billion US dollars annually. So this is, of course, a very large sum of money. And we can see that there are high profit margins, of course, in this drug trade. And the profit margins tend to be highest at the retail level, so at the point where we meet the customer. But profit per person is actually lower here because you have a lot of people making these retail sales, whereas at the wholesale level, you tend to have fewer suppliers. So even though the profit margin is lower there, it's spread out over fewer individuals. So the profit per individual tends to be higher. So the illicit net income was estimated to range between 11 billion to 17 billion a year. And based on expert solicitation and data that we get from the ARQ that I mentioned before, so the annual report questionnaire, it was estimated that between 3.4 and 6.9 billion US dollars a year cross borders between 2019 and 2022 to manage the profits. So this is IFFs related to income management of the money that was the profits that were earned through the trafficking of opiates and methamphetamine. I will note that this is, of course, based on limited data, and the estimates have a degree of uncertainty in them. Finally, just a brief word on IFF patents, and then there's one more slide on implications for policy. So in terms of IFF patents, we see that there are key transit hubs located along the route. So not every country is equally important. In some countries, well, not the countries themselves, of course, but trafficking groups based in those countries specialize in the distribution of specific drugs. And these hubs may also, so they are hubs for the physical distribution of the drugs, but they may also be hubs for the management of the income, so generating IFFs. Some of the transfer methods that were observed include underground banking networks, but also bulk cash smuggling. So cash still seems to be king on this particular route, but we also slowly see the rise of importance of cryptocurrencies, of course. And some of the IFFs related to income management were related, of course, to investment and consumption in traditional sectors that we tend to see in other markets as well, where these drug traffickers tend to purchase real estate in other countries or purchase luxury vehicles. So finally, the implications for policy. We really want to strengthen efforts to better understand the flow of assets related to drug trafficking, and also strengthen, for example, beneficial ownership transparency to help detect and disrupt these kinds of financial crimes. A recommendation is also to improve the data collection on drugs and synthetic drugs, particularly also through the tools that UNODC has, so the data collection tools that we have, because this really requires quite a lot of high quality data in order to be able to reconstruct these flows. So yeah, this is quite important. And we would also encourage countries to conduct more research on typologies of money laundering. So this includes analyzing different methods of moving, storing, and utilizing illicit funds to better understand how criminal actors are using their illicit profits and where the money actually goes after the money has been earned domestically. Yeah, so that was just a brief overview of a study to show a more practical application of IFFs and to see what kind of information, what kind of insights you can generate with it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Very, very insightful indeed. I think we have 2 more questions, if not 3, especially on this report. I'll invite Beatrice to take us through those questions quickly before we move on to the next session.
Yeah, thank you. There are 2 more questions. One is from Lorette from CBS, Team Curaçao. It says, how do you get the figures or methods for the estimate drug flow for the opium or drugs trade? And the other one that is from Nigeria, it says, how do you measure IFF from such proceeds of crime from drugs using virtual assets and cash smuggling? And is referring from drugs as well.
Yes, great question. So for the first one on methods, specifically for the report I just presented, I would encourage you to look at the report and also the version from 2015, because it has very detailed annexes on the exact methodology that was used to calculate all of this. But they will also be covered partially from a country level perspective in the upcoming guidance that UNODC will release early next year. But the data that we use specifically for this study, where we analyze the entire Balkan route, relies a lot on data that UNODC collects. Like I said, the ARQ data and the IDS data that UNODC receives from member states. Particularly the ARQ data, most of those data are published on an annual basis in the World Drug Report, but the data on individual drug seizures is not publicly accessible. But again, if you want to just know for yourself as a country, you do not need to use this very complicated methodology to produce estimates for an entire route. And I would recommend you follow the single country perspective that will be explained in detail in the upcoming guidelines. Then for the second question, how do you measure IFFs from such proceeds of crime from drug use and virtual assets and cash smuggling? So, like I said, we use the bottom-up approach to try to determine how much money is being made. So we look at, for example, for a specific country, we look at, okay, how much is produced domestically, how much is consumed, imported, exported, etc. And based on that, we can determine how much drugs are coming into or leaving a country. And there should be an illicit financial flow associated with those flows. Once we have those flows, we can only really estimate what proportion of that is then used, for example, for in the income management phase, and then maybe 50% of the profits are invested abroad, for example. But purely based on that, we cannot determine the exact how criminals do this, whether they invest abroad by putting a big bag of money in a car and driving over a border, or whether they use the money to buy cryptocurrency and then use that cryptocurrency to buy real estate abroad. That is not something that we can derive just from the data that we have. This would really have to be supplemented by detailed data in suspicious transaction reports or data that the financial intelligence unit might have. But it would have to be expert assessment, essentially. Just purely from the data that we have on seizures, etc., we cannot determine this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Martin. And thank you very much for colleagues sending questions, which makes really the session more interactive. Before we move on to the next sessions, I would like to take 1 minute for stretching. We've been sitting for more than an hour. let's please put on our video and show that we are stretching. Let's put on video, guys, and let's do stretching. I don't think Alex is not stretching. Very good. Nice. So you can take off your video now, and let's now move to the I think last sessions of the day. We will hear from Mr. White Dyer Lee, Head of the Government Public Security and Justice Statistics Unit at National Institute of Statistics and Geography of Mexico, discussing previous exercise on crime-related IFF and the work remaining to be done. He will be followed by Ms. Adriana Oropeza, coordinator of the UNODC Energy Center of Excellence. She will be discussing towards the construction of information system on is it IFF or FFI and legal markets? So
IFF.
It's IFF, yeah. So we will hear from our two presenters respectively, and then please keep your questions and comment after the second presenter. Then we may have a round of question and comment on these country experiences. Over to you, Mr. Dyer Lee.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Just one housekeeping question. Should I present or would someone else present? I have my presentation ready. Hello?
Mr. Dwight, can you please get closer to the microphone?
Oh, hold on just a second.
Do you need help to present? I can do it for you.
Oh no, I can do it. I can do it. Can you hear me now?
Perfect. It's no so good.
Now? Is this better?
Better.
Yes, much better.
Okay, so let me present. I'll share my presentation. Can you see it?
I can see it.
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Excellent. So, okay, again, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Dwight Dyer. I am the Director General for Government Public Security and Justice Statistics at INEGI Mexico's National Statistics Office. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation. And here we go. Okay, so INEGI was invited to test drive the methodology developed by UNCTAD and UNODC, and to try to replicate the results that the Center for Excellence, the UNODC INEGI Center for Excellence, did in 2018. So the general objective for this project at INEGI was to replicate and refine the IFF estimation methodology. How? Well, we needed to identify regular, consistent, and reliable sources in order to make sure that we can have a replicable methodology for future estimates. The phases of the study are, as you can see, there was a literature review, a review of the theoretical framework. We collected the data, we analyzed the data quality, we proposed some refinements and adjustments to the methodology, but we still have not reported the results, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. Okay, so the conceptual framework, like Diana and Martin have already said, considers our UNODC publication. They consider different sources for international illegal financial flows. And I will be focusing on illegal markets, particularly the drug trade and migrant smuggling through Mexico. And again, like I said, the aim of our project was to replicate the estimates that were calculated by the Center for Excellence. The Center for Excellence calculated or estimated these financial flows from 2015 to 2018 using an aggregated method. Okay, so in order to perform this project, we had to review a lot of literature and a lot of sources. We searched for data from 2012 to 2023. We selected 115 sources and analyzed them according to the UNCTAD criteria: regularity, availability, topicality, scope, granularity, interoperability. And we created a quick index giving each source a score. And after we did this for all the sources that we found or that we identified, we came up with these 115 sources that are germane to both drug trafficking and to migrant smuggling for different markets within the drug trafficking area and for drug smuggling. Migrant smuggling through Mexico. So I'll start with the drug trade. The Center for Excellence made estimates or calculated estimates for cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. And INEGI's proposal would include marijuana and fentanyl. There are some general assumptions that I would like to point out because these will be important as we discuss these estimates. First, Mexico is a producer country, it's a consumption market, and a transit country. This makes the estimate of illicit financial flows for the drug trade complicated because depending on the type of drug, Mexico will be more of a producer, more of a consumption market, or more of a transit country, or a combination of each, of all these. For inward financial flows, we assume that Mexico is the main source of drugs into the United States. This is, again, a broad generalization, but this is how the study was organized. And for outward financial flows, we assume that Mexican imports are the sum of the domestic consumption plus seizures, and there's a share of imports that goes through to the United States, and I'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so like I was saying, this is a general model of illicit financial flows for Mexico. Depending on the drug, be it cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, or fentanyl, outward financial flows
Sorry, we can hear you, Dwight.
Inward. Hold on. For inward financial flows, Mexico can be either a transit country, a consumption, or mainly a producer country. Okay, you can hear me better. I'm sorry, my internet connection is faulty. Okay, so I'll just recap this. Depending on the drug that we study, the components of the outward and inward illicit financial flows for Mexico will change. Mexico, for the outward financial flows, definitely a transit country and sometimes a consumption country. And for inward financial flows, either a transit country or a producer country. The general formula that Martin and Diana presented or explained is fairly simple. For inward financial flows, you have Mexican exports times export prices. For outward financial flows, you have Mexican imports times import prices. Now, some of the refinements that we propose include, for inward financial flows, multiplying the sum of U.S. consumption plus U.S. seizures times the purity of the drug times a connection coefficient. A connection coefficient is basically a term that allows us to estimate what share of seizures in the United States come from Mexico. And this helps us adjust the volume of drugs and therefore the volume of coming from Mexico and therefore the volume of the financial flow and U.S. whole prices. And for the outward financial flows, again, we made a small adjustment, which is Mexican consumption plus Mexican seizures by purity plus Mexican exports times the wholesale price. Again, oh, and one other refinement that I'm sorry, I did not put on this slide was that we considered inflation. So we deflated the estimates, which will for several years using the U.S. dollar at 2019 values as the base. So this will have a small effect, or sometimes a significant effect, on the estimates. Okay. So for the cocaine trade, which is probably the best studied or one of the best studied markets in the world, what I'm presenting here is both the inward and outward illicit financial flows for the pilot conducted by the for Excellence, the replicate or the exercise where we replicated the methodology, and then estimates, preliminary estimates, I should emphasize, using the adjusted methodology that we propose. As you can see on the left-hand side, for inward financial flows, both the pilot and the replication of the pilot yield very, very similar results. Basically, the smaller differences account for updating data on seizures in the United States. Now, when we apply these adjustments factors for purity and when we take inflation into account, we have a significantly different estimate both for inward and outward financial flows. For 2018, our best estimate, and again, this is preliminary, is $5.7 billion only for cocaine as inward financial flows. And as outward financial flows, meaning again, consumption plus seizures, or what is consumed in Mexico, we have an estimate of $757 million, slightly or under $1 billion. So these are our first estimates. Again, we need to refine, and I'll come back to this in a second. We'll need to define or refine the use of sources. But I wanted to show you again, in general, what our estimates and the using our proposed methodology, what the inward and outward illicit financial flows for the main three drugs that the Excellence studied, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin, are like. And again, our estimates are using this methodology are higher than in the pilot. Just for at this point, I just want to show you this because I want to come back to some other issues in a minute. For migrant smuggling, the Center for Excellence studied Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras are what are known as the northern half of the Central American Triangle. These are the countries closest to Mexico, and they're a significant source of migrants, but not the only source of Central American migrants to the United States. We suggest including Nicaragua, which is also part of the triangle, and Venezuela, which in the last few years has become a significant source of migrants traveling through Mexico, as countries that should ideally be included in the study. Again, some general assumptions. First, that each migrant attempts one crossing of the country of Mexico into the United States per year. Second, that basically every migrant that attempts to cross Mexico has undocumented status. This again is a generalization because there are cases, sometimes significant, where migrants enter the country with a valid travel document, but overstay the period and then become undocumented. And finally, we need to make an assumption on which is the final destination country, because this will have an effect on the estimate of illicit financial flows if we consider that there are two different types of flows. One is to cross Mexico, to go to transit through Mexico, and the other one that we assume is to cross into the United States. Okay, so for inward financial flows, essentially migrants coming into Mexico, we assume that their stay in Mexico is generally less than 1 year, and that the smuggler country of residence, this is important because depending on how we define or how we assume or where we assume the smuggler resides, the flow will either be inward or outward, or there will be no financial flow, international financial flow. What the smuggler country of residence is. We use a proxy that is, being a proxy, it is not very accurate in some cases, which is the country of payment. If you paid the smuggler outside of Mexico, then we count that as an inward financial flow. If you paid the smuggler inside Mexico, then that does not count as a financial flow, international financial flow. And similarly, for the outward international illicit financial flow, we make an assumption depending on the country of residence for the smuggler, but using the proxy of the country of contact. If you made contact with the smuggler in Mexico, then that would not count as a financial flow, international financial flow. If you made contact with the smuggler from outside of Mexico, then that would all basically in the United States, that would count as an international financial flow. I'll come back to these. The general formula is, and you can read this in the documentation, but I'll just make a small review of it, is we need to estimate the number of migrants, and these being undocumented migrants is a source of significant variance and error. The percentage using a smuggler, the cost of the quote-unquote service, again, the services being traveling through Mexico, transiting through Mexico, or crossing into the United States, and we need to differentiate these because of cost and volume, and the smuggler country of residence, like I said a minute ago. So for inward financial flows, we need to identify the population, the number of migrants that either remain in Mexico that are detained, that are detained by Mexico and those detained by the United States. As migrants flow through the country, some decide to stay in Mexico, some die or go missing. Some are detained in Mexico, some are detained by the United States, but some of them are successful in crossing over and staying in the United States. So we have to add these complements in order to have a significant or a better estimate of the number of migrants. And the sources that we use for these are a number of administrative records from the United States, from DHS and CBP, CBP being the Border Protection Agency, also from surveys both in Mexico and in the United States, and from administrative records in Mexico. And this, I should say, should give us some pause, because these administrative records and surveys some of them have significant methodological differences. They do not count or necessarily count every migrant the way that we are counting them. Some might overcount the number of migrants being detained if they try to cross more than once, so on and so forth. So there is a significant variance in this estimate of the number of migrants. For smuggler use, again, I'm sorry, returning to inward financial flows. So we identify the volume of migrants and the type of whether or not they use the smuggler. And we use two different kinds of surveys that are collected in Mexico, both in the south-north direction and the north-south direction, which allows us to identify fairly accurately what the share of migrants using a smuggler is. And one of the reasons that this is, I mean, not every migrant uses a smuggler. If you have previous experience either crossing through Mexico or crossing into the United States, you might not use a smuggler. You might come in legally and then overstay your visa, and then you might not use a smuggler. I mean, there's different reasons, so we need to estimate this percentage. And in order to estimate the inward financial flow, we need to make or have an idea of whether or not the destination country is the US or Mexico. Usually, but not every time, people from Central America or migrants from Central America tend to try to cross Mexico in order to reach the United States. But this is not the same for every country. For example, migrants from Guatemala often, and I should say quite often, decide to just move into Mexico. So again, there is significant variance in these estimates. And then for outward financial flows, we only estimate the flow of Mexicans crossing into the United States, because otherwise we would be overcounting migrants from Central America. Here are some preliminary estimates of the percentage of migrants crossing legally into Mexico and the percentage of migrants looking to stay in Mexico by country of origin. We include El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and the mean in the darkest shade. And as you can see, depending on the country, the percentage of migrants legally coming into Mexico has increased for Guatemala and El Salvador, and Honduras, I'm sorry, but not for El Salvador. And for migrants looking to stay in Mexico, there has been some convergence across all these countries, and there was a dip right before the pandemic, which increased during 2020. But these dynamics, or what migrants relate in the surveys, also has to do not only with their attempts or their intentions, but with migration policy in the United States. So these are quite variable. Then we made some estimates of the percentage using a smuggler by type of quote unquote service, which is crossing Mexico or crossing into the United States or transiting through Mexico. And as you can see, there's a significant, if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, these are the estimates for migrants that were retained in Mexico, and the estimates for transiting through Mexico or crossing into the United States are significantly different, with the highest estimate being trying to cross into the United States. But then, I mean, if we compare these to those migrants that were detained and returned by the United States, well, first of all, we see a significant change, even an order of magnitude increase for transiting through Mexico, and a nearly tripling of the estimate for crossing into the United States. So most of the financial flows are originated in the attempts to cross into the United States. And these, again, go up or down depending on several reasons, but one of the important ones is that immigration policy in the United States creates a deterrent effect on these flows and therefore on the estimates of the financial operations. I'll go through this because I don't want to take too much time, but we made some estimates for the mean cost by the type of service, which keeps going up. And these are indeed deflated. So there's an increase in the cost of the service. For inward financial flows for the 2012-2020 period, we see quite a bit of variance, significantly high in 2019. This because likely in expectation of a change in government in the United States in 2020, there was a surge, but also because of Mexican immigration policies. Again, comparing the inward financial flows from the SDGs in the light blue, the Center for Excellence in the slightly darker blue, the replication of the methodology by INEGI in dark blue, and the adjustments proposed by INEGI, we see a significant difference in that the way that the adjustments that we propose affect the estimate. Basically, in addition to taking inflation into account, which not work this way, we have a significant issue with identifying the country of residence of the smuggler. I mean, the model, being a model, needs to be parsimonious, but reality is wicked. It's wicked difficult, because most smuggler operations operate transnationally, and it's very hard to, if we make a small change in the assumption of where the smuggler resides, the estimates go up and down, like you see on this slide. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but this is the main reason. For outward financial flows, again, we have significant differences between one year and the next. But on average, we have close to $15 million in the outward financial flows. These are from Mexicans trying to cross into the United States. And then when we compare, again, we compare these three exercises. For Mexicans crossing into the United States, we have a much more consistent estimate. Slight differences across the exercises and depending on the year, but we find that the data that we can count on or we can use is much more reliable. Now, to come to the conclusions, and again, these are very general. I'd love to discuss these in more detail with you. some of the assumptions that we need to make on the model seem fragile, depending on the market. This is certainly truer for migrant trade than the drug trade, but it's still an issue. Second, inconsistencies across data sources. This is particularly difficult for assessing illicit financial flows in migration, in migrant smuggling. But it is also true for the drug trade, depending on the type of drug that you study. Like I said, for cocaine, it's one of the best studied markets, but for basically every other type of drug, different agencies report in different formats at different times with different reference periods, and the data is not necessarily, or even units. So the estimates, it's difficult to find reliable and comparable sources across Mexico and the United States in order to estimate every single drug market, which again impacts the reliability and the continuity and completeness of the data. Therefore, even though we have made significant progress in replicating the methodology and in refining some aspects of it, we find the cost of developing a statistical program to estimate these illicit financial flows is still high for us. I think there is significant work to be done across and with the help of UNODC and UNCTAD in order to get some of these sources to improve, in order that we may again replicate this and refine and further refine the methodology in order to get better estimates, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, thank you for your attention. I will stop here, and I will be glad to have my colleague Adriano Oropesa continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Dwight, for your very insightful presentation. In interest of time, let's move directly to our colleague Adriana. For whoever has questions, please keep your question after Adriana's presentation, then we may come back to you. Over to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Douglas. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all for joining us from different parts of the world. And let me try to begin sharing the slides. And while I can do this, can you let me know if you can? It's loading, so you should be seeing it.
Your audio is a little bit choppy, Adriana. Your audio is a little bit choppy.
Does it sound better now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor, for it's a pleasure to share with you again another session sharing our experiences, and the one that we are gonna share today with you colleagues. It's a little bit of what we have learned from having the opportunity to work with 5 different countries, with different agencies, with different institutions in different markets. So this is a little bit more following what Martijn and Diana had presented before on a conceptual, but also in terms of how to apply that conceptual framework that was shared to us this morning, and how we can use the information and collect the information, but also the challenges that Dr. Dyer mentioned just in the previous presentation. So this is going to be a little bit of what is the options or the interests that the countries have to, let's say, materialize in order to begin a pilot or begin to collecting data in terms of what their own national interests and how these methodologies can be applied to each of the situations. As Martijn and Diana mentioned, if you remember, Diana mentioned these 4 categories that we have on the framework, but also what we have found in these different exercises that we have had in Latin America is that some of the activities do not necessarily occur in isolations, that these phenomena are complex in nature, but also that legal and illegal activities coexist. In some cases, we have found or we have heard we have some evidence that some of the trafficking routes are interrelated. So we need to consider these kind of things before we begin the analysis. In terms of the sources of crime-related illicit financial flows, Martin was sharing that this is working in some guidelines in some specific markets. But for example, we have been requested or participate in different activities covering other illegal activities, such as firearm. Martin and Dr. Dyer talk about drugs, and we're gonna go in a minute on that. But there's also firearms trafficking, gold and mining, fuels, which can be legal in their production, but illegal in the way they were access to them, medical products and contraband, smuggling of migrants, wildlife and timber, human trafficking, but also cultural property, which is very relevant to Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Dyer also mentioned one exercise that they did after we worked together. And when we are talking about drug markets, we need to understand exactly what we would like to be studying. For example, Dr. Dyer mentioned that when the Center of Excellence worked with INEGI, there were 3 substances chosen at the moment, and then they decided to select 2 more that were relevant to the country at the moment. So, for example, in the next slide, we're going to focus and use cocaine as an example. But one of the countries' questions that, and also that was mentioned in the previous presentation, what is the role and what is happening in the countries? So we need to assess these economic activities. For example, he mentioned that Mexico could be more relevant in terms of cultivation of one of the substances, but not necessarily in the others. So when countries are trying to assess these illicit financial flows, they need to determine, let's say, their country profiles in terms of the productions, but also these intermediate activities that Martin mentioned, for example, in the Balkan route example. And then we also need to define who and where this consumption is being is happening. For example, if we are only analyzing established markets, and in the case that was presented earlier, for example, Mexico decided just to use the U.S. market, but we know that the drug can be going to other different established markets, such as Western and Central Europe. But also the drug can go and is going to some other developing markets that could be covering, for example, Central and Southeast Asia, Africa, and South and Eastern Europe. And then we also need who is involved in trafficking, and Dr. Dyer can be especially mentioned or highlighted not only the role, but the nationalities where these people or these actors that are doing or providing the services needed to do the traffic and are residing. In terms of the cocaine and supply chain, for example, we need to consider that we need to identify where it's being produced in terms of the cultivation, in terms of the landowners, which are the agricultural producers, who is the personnel dedicated to transportation or also security. So we're presenting an example, which is not like the full or the complete supply chain in terms of all the different stages, and but also that also inputs that are needed across this value chain or the supply chain. So we go from the agricultural to the, let's say, agricultural and industrial processing, then the production of different products of the cocaine, and then how it's being commercialized, distributed, or let's say being moved across the world. And this brings us, for example, this is one of my favorite slides from a recent, the most recent drug report that UNODC has published this year, and where my colleague Martin kind of collaborates. And for example, it shows the extension of the evidence that we have collected in UNODC to show the size of the market, for example, for cocaine. So when we decide to Martin, in one of his slides, he was mentioning 6 steps on the methodology. So one of the first steps is deciding or identifying this network and how does the product is being moved. And this brings you to another challenge in terms of data collecting. And some of my colleagues before me have also mentioned the challenges that we have related to collecting data from different agencies in different parts of the country. And this requires definitely a coordination mechanism that includes all the possible institutions that have some mandate or participate, and then establish some statistical process to not only to collect the data, but as it has been mentioned before, to normalize, standardize in terms of quantities, different products, and also to be aware of the different regions or geographical areas that should be covered in every single country. And then this is where we begin to, and Dr. Daya at the end of his presentation, he mentioned that it's a costly and challenging task to establish a statistical process, but just only doing the pilot, it brings a lot of different, I would say, good results and lessons learned in terms of how to work together among different institutions to collect, for example, the drugs that are being seized in terms of drugs, the quantity, the purity of substances. We have seen some countries that they do collect some data in terms of the quantity that is being seized, but not necessarily has the interest of analyzing the purity of the substance. And this can also bring some insights, not only to the characterization of the IFF, but also in terms of the how the drug is being trafficked and where is it going. The price in retails we have found in the different pilot projects that we have been participating is that there are different prices in terms of the retail, the wholesale, the border markets, where the places are being produced, and also he mentioned the connection coefficients. We will need to understand and to identify also these kind of intermediate products or intermediate inputs that Martin mentioned in terms of what does it take to produce and to convert from a crop into a product that can be distributed across the world. Then we have the information about the traffickers in terms of how are being seized again. And also we need to know the consumers and the prevalence in different markets across the country, and the prices, for example, in terms of retail and dosage, but also frequency of use to have a good estimation of the IFF. However, we also find, and though there were also some challenges that were shared before, we also have to be aware that in some, let's say, illegal markets, they also coexist with legal economies, and it's very difficult and challenging to differentiate the way and the flows of the materials going from a legally harvested timber area, log yards, into the exportation processes or the processing, and then the points of sale. So we have to consider also these intersections of the legal and the illegal economies and how do they coexist. For example, and again, in terms of the IFF, and this presentation was not intended to go one by one into the different variables that can be used to estimate the different IFF, but rather to present a list of the variables and topics that have to be considered when we are doing these estimations. Finally, and not the least, again, in terms of another market that is relevant in the Latin American region is the illegal mining, where again we can find and we can have some registers of these legal activities that have been done, because one institution may have provided some authorization, but then we have to go and find these other exploration or extraction sites that are illegal in terms of their regulatory origin. And finally, again, just a little bit of what are the different variables that we can find in terms of that we need to estimate the different flows that we have been talking this morning. Finally, thank you very much, and I would be very happy to answer if there's any question regarding experiences.
Thank you very much, Adriana. We've now reached the end of the two presentations. I'm inviting questions and comment, not only from the chat, but from also the participants. Anyone who has question, comment, please shout, raise your hand, and let us know whether you need a floor. Beatrice, any question from the chats?
No, we don't have questions or comments yet.
Yeah, I'll probably go with one question that comes in my mind from really Martin's presentation to the last one here, especially given the African experience. So we've been working with different African countries to pilot, but also to deepen the methodology to measure IFF, and all the African countries do prefer rather focusing on commercial and tax-related IFF, not because they don't see crime-related IFF as a big risk, but mainly because of the difficulties putting together reliable data. And this is mostly related to the level of institutional gaps in Africa in relation to tracking the crime-related IFF. For example, as part of the DA15, we've discussed with different countries on the possibility of really looking into these different types of IFF, but discussing with policymakers, technical people, they all agree that this is a very serious phenomenon. But the problem is that the institutions are not strong enough to provide or collect data that can be used. So what are the alternatives actually of measuring crime-related IFF in a weaker institutional framework? I don't know to who this question will be directed, but to whoever works on this. I mean, I would probably go start by hearing from Duarte. What is your take on this? I mean, given your experience in South America, and what do you think is the alternative in the presence of a very weak institution and hard environment for collecting data related to crime?
Thank you, Douglas. This is a tough question because when we work, or on the work that we have done between Mexico and the United States, we face a significant step between the capabilities, the state capabilities of the United States agencies to produce data and the Mexican agencies. This is not to say that Mexican agencies do not produce data. They produce data on a regular basis. And we at INEGI have different statistical programs to process this data and to make it public. However, I think one of the main challenges is standardization. Even though, and this is not only for Mexico, this I think also applies to the United States. Like I was saying, different agencies in the United States and Mexico may produce estimates of seizures of different drugs, but the reference periods are different for some of them. Not every one of them, but some of them. Also, the units used may change. For example, for opium poppies, in Mexico, we request this information as mass, essentially how many kilos. or tons of opium poppies are seized and destroyed. And sometimes, even within the same institution in Mexico, at the subnational level, we'll get variations on how this is reported. For the United States, this may not be as hard a problem. There's a little bit more standardization, but with the United States, we need to have updates, or to keep looking for updates, because these data are again inconsistent in that sense. So how do you work when when you have different state capabilities? I would suggest that one step would be to try to get some of the very, very basic variables standardized. Also, the periods, the reference period are key, because otherwise you will be looking at different time frames, and this will make the estimates very, very complicated. So we need to get some basic agreements across countries on how to measure some of these variables. Another issue might be the regularity with which the data is processed. Some agencies in the United States have very quick turnaround periods, and those are fairly reliable. You can always expect CBP to process information and publish it year by year, but this may not be the case for other agencies. And I'm talking only about illicit drugs. If we talk about migrant smuggling, it's another ballgame. It's quite complicated. And then again, I would suggest, and this is something that I'm sure that Diana and Martin have had long conversations about, is standardization of the basic variables needed to conduct the estimates. I hope this helps.
It does a lot. Thank you very much. Any other question, comment, interventions?
We have a question that I think that is more to Martin, and
Okay.
it says, if the presented data on estimated drug flow and IFFs from the
I've seen the
opium
question.
drug
Thank you.
is based on US figures, how can these metrics can be compared or normalized to reflect the situation in other countries, considering varying law enforcement efficiencies, drug trade routes and volumes, financial regulations, stringencies, cultural and socioeconomic factors?
So to answer this specifically for the study we did on the Balkan routes, the US is not on the Balkan route, so we did not use any information from the United States. Like I said, we used information that is collected by UNODC from the member states themselves. So member states report to us, okay, we've seized X amount of drugs this year and X amount of another drug. And we use the information reported by all of these different individual member states themselves and collate all of that information to create our network analysis. So it is self-reported data from the countries themselves. But of course, there are large differences between countries in terms of enforcement capabilities, or relating to Douglas's point, even ability to generate some of the basic data required can vary quite a lot. So different data from different countries may not have the same reliability, but this is why the study on the Balkan route is comparatively easier, because it relies mostly on data from European countries, which tend to report high quality data in a consistent manner. For other parts of the world, this can be far more challenging. Yes.
Thank you very much, Martin. If there is any other question, I'd like really to thank you all for your very active involvement and participation, especially the presenters, for your very insightful messages. And we've learned a lot, especially around the crime-related IFFs. I'm sure we'll learn more on the other side of the IFF in the coming days. Before we conclude, I'll invite Alfonso to give us a closing statement, especially some announcement for the next day as well. Thank you.
Thank you. You can open your cameras. It could be good to see you all who participate this day. To say thank you a lot, Douglas. You too. Thanks a lot, and thanks for all those who were connected to in this day. And we hope you connect tomorrow. We will have a very interesting day, because we will talk now about tax and commercial illicit financial flows, the other side of the coin. And I hope we enjoy it as we did today. And see you tomorrow. Thank you, and thank you for all the team who make this possible. Who is making this possible? Maybe it's to Monica, to special Monica. Monica was involved a lot in this process, and Beatriz and Paula, and also all the interpreters. Thank you a lot. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See you
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Have a good afternoon, evening.